At 6:10 p.m., I pulled into the driveway. My suitcases were on the porch. My fiancée screamed I was cheating. Then her face twisted and she spat. I've got a boyfriend too. At 6:10 p.m., I pulled into the driveway, tired from the workday, expecting dinner and a quiet evening. Instead, the first thing that hit me was the sight of my own suitcases, 2 large ones, plus a duffel bag, lined up on the porch like abandoned luggage at a train station. For a second, I thought maybe it was some kind of prank. Maybe she was airing out the closet. Maybe she was rearranging furniture. But the porch light was on, and the way the bags were stacked, zippers open, clothes sticking out, there was nothing accidental about it. Before I could even step out of the car, the front door swung open with such force that it banged against the siding. My fiancée stormed out, face twisted in fury, hair pulled back like she'd been preparing for a fight. Her voice cut through the air so sharply that a neighbor across the street peeked through their blinds. She screamed that I was a liar, a fraud, a cheater. The word echoed, and I froze in disbelief. There hadn't been a single moment in our relationship where I had strayed. I was the one paying bills, keeping the house together, sacrificing evenings to make sure her tuition was covered, her car payments made on time, her family obligations helped. And now, standing in the driveway, I was being accused of betrayal in front of whoever cared to listen. I tried to get out a word, but she wasn't interested in listening. She hurled accusations one after another, rapid fire, building her own performance for the street. And then came the words that would snap everything in half. I've got a boyfriend too. The sentence came out like venom, and she didn't even try to soften it. There was no hesitation, no guilt. She wanted it to land like a punch. And it did. The neighbors weren't just watching anymore. Some had stepped out onto their porches. A woman 2 houses down called for her dog, but didn't go inside. This wasn't just an argument. It was a public execution. I asked who. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried enough for the question to ripple in the air. She smirked, eyes darting toward the corner of the street. And then headlights appeared. A beat-up black sedan crawled into view and pulled right into my driveway, like it had every right to be there. The man who stepped out was younger than me, maybe mid-20s, wearing a cheap leather jacket and sneakers that looked like they hadn't seen a wash in months. He walked with that lazy arrogance, the kind of swagger that screams trouble long before the mouth opens. He didn't say a word at first, just draped an arm around her shoulders as if to stake his claim. The message was clear. This had been orchestrated. They had planned this moment. My fiancée's face lit up with triumph when he touched her. It wasn't love. It was power. She wanted me to see it, to feel humiliated. And she wanted everyone else on the block to witness it too. I stayed frozen for a moment, car door still open, one hand on the steering wheel. My mind wasn't racing. It was slowing down, locking onto details. The suitcases weren't packed carefully. Some of my things were missing. The neighbor's teenage son was filming from his phone across the street. My fiancée had makeup on even though she'd told me that morning she was staying home to study. The leather jacket stranger had no hesitation pulling into a private driveway. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment confession. It was an ambush. I closed the car door slowly, walked toward the porch, and asked again, quieter this time, who he was. She barked out his name like it was supposed to hurt me, like his existence somehow erased everything I had done for her. The man smirked, finally speaking, tossing out a sarcastic remark about how I should have seen it coming. The air felt heavier. My fiancée took a step forward, pointing toward the street, yelling that everyone would know what I had done, that she wouldn't let me destroy her life. She twisted the story in real time, framing me as the villain before I could even speak. And the more she shouted, the more neighbors gathered at safe distances, pretending to care about their lawns or cars while feeding on the spectacle. I wanted to walk away. My instinct told me to keep calm, to leave the shouting match to her and the smug intruder. But when I turned slightly toward my suitcase, the man chuckled and muttered that I wouldn't need to unpack anywhere near here again. That laugh wasn't just arrogance, it was ownership. That was the moment the rage simmered in me, not wild, not uncontrolled, but sharp and cold. I didn't yell. I didn't swing. I didn't even argue. Instead, I took the smallest suitcase off the porch, opened it right there on the driveway, and pulled out the first shirt I saw. It wasn't even mine. It was hers. One of those novelty tees she wore to bed. My things were mixed with hers, and the realization hit me like a slow burn explosion. She had packed my bags quickly, but she hadn't packed her own. She wasn't leaving. She was replacing. I asked her, almost conversationally, where she thought I was cheating. The accusation still hung, vague and venomous. She snapped back some nonsense about late nights, about messages she knew I was hiding, about the way I sometimes stayed at work longer. None of it was real. She was projecting, turning her own lies into my supposed sins. Leather Jacket laughed again and pulled her tighter. He doesn't get it. he said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. The humiliation burned, but it didn't break me. It carved something steadier inside me. I realized then that the battle wasn't in the driveway, not in front of an audience. She wanted chaos. She wanted me to shout, to lose control, to give her evidence that I was unstable, abusive, unworthy. But I refused to hand it to her. So I did something none of them expected. I picked up the other suitcase, put it in my trunk, and shut the lid without a word. Then I walked past both of them, back toward the house. That's when she lost control. She ran after me, screaming, clawing at my arm, accusing me of walking into her new life. He followed, posturing like a guard dog, daring me to step inside. But I already had my key, and I already knew the house wasn't just hers. My name was on the mortgage. My money had built a roof over her head. I opened the door calmly, walked inside, and locked it behind me. The shouting outside grew louder. Fists pounded against the door. She shrieked threats about calling the police, about telling everyone I had been violent. He added fuel, shouting that I had no right to step inside their house. But I wasn't rattled. I wasn't even listening anymore. I was looking at the living room, at the pictures on the wall, at the evidence of years I had invested. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my chest, that this wasn't going to end in the driveway. This wasn't a fight. This was a war. When the banging stopped, I peeked through the window. She was sobbing now, theatrically, collapsing into his arms. He pretended to comfort her while flashing a smug grin at the neighbors. Some shook their heads, some whispered, some walked back inside. But the damage was done. A story had been planted. What they didn't realize was that I wasn't broken. I was documenting. Every scream, every suitcase, every witness. They weren't just weapons against me. They were evidence I could use when the time came. By the time the sun dipped, the driveway was empty again except for their cars. She had gone inside with him. My suitcases were back on the porch, and I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the walls, letting the rage cool into something sharper. I didn't know exactly what I'd do yet, but I knew this much. She had staged this spectacle to ruin me. Instead, she had written the first page of her own downfall. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of voices outside. For a second, I thought it had been a dream. The suitcases, the shouting, the stranger in my driveway. But when I looked through the curtains, reality was worse. His car was still in the driveway, parked crooked, blocking half the garage door. And on the porch, my fiancée was laughing with him, leaning into his shoulder like he already belonged there. A half-empty coffee cup sat on the step beside them. My stomach turned. She hadn't just humiliated me the night before. She had let him stay. I stood back from the window, pulse steady but heavy. The house smelled faintly of her perfume and his cologne mixed together, a violation of space more cutting than words. I gathered my keys, locked myself in the spare room with my laptop, and began making calls. I didn't leave the house. If she wanted me out, she would have to do it legally. My name was on the papers. By noon, the shouting began again. This time, it wasn't on the driveway. It was inside. She barged into the spare room, voice cracking with venom, yelling that I was making her new boyfriend uncomfortable, that I needed to move my things and leave. She waved her phone at me, pretending to dial the police. I calmly reminded her that this was my house too. Her bluff faltered, but she didn't retreat. Instead, she changed tactics. That evening, posts started appearing on social media. Pictures of her and him together in my kitchen, captions about finally finding true love, snide remarks about cheaters getting what they deserve. She hadn't just rewritten the story privately. She was broadcasting it. Friends I had known for years liked her posts. Some even commented support. People I thought would stand by me were suddenly silent. Within days, the whispers reached my work. A coworker asked, awkwardly, if everything at home was okay. The betrayal spread like a stain, fast, sticky, impossible to control. But I didn't argue. I didn't post. I didn't shout. Instead, I observed. The man, her so-called boyfriend, started making himself at home. He parked in my spot, ate from my fridge, left his shoes by the door. He even had the audacity to fix himself drinks from the liquor cabinet I had stocked. His clothes appeared in the laundry room. My toothbrush went missing, replaced by his cheap one. Neighbors noticed. Some avoided eye contact when they saw me outside. Others smirked knowingly, buying into the lie she had spread. But not everyone swallowed it. One evening, as I was carrying a box of files to the car, the woman from across the street, widowed, quiet, never one for gossip, walked over. She didn't ask questions. She didn't accuse. She just muttered, "I saw everything that night. Don't let her win." Then she turned and went back inside. That sentence anchored me. Evidence wasn't just in my head. There were witnesses. But while I thought long-term, she doubled down on the short-term humiliation. A few nights later, I came home from a late shift to find the living room rearranged. The photographs of me and her, holidays, birthdays, even the framed engagement picture, were gone. In their place were new pictures. Him and her, smiling, arms around each other, posed like they had been together for years. The cruelty wasn't subtle. It was pointed, sharp, deliberate. She wanted to erase me before I was even gone. I confronted her in the hallway, demanding to know where she'd put the originals. She laughed, tossed her hair, and said they'd been thrown out. Just like that. Years of memories, shredded in a garbage bag, probably already at the dump. The boyfriend stood nearby, leaning against the wall, smirking as if he had already won. But I didn't give him the reaction he wanted. I just stared long enough to make him uncomfortable, then turned and walked away. Because by then, I had started preparing. I went through bank accounts, making sure my money was protected. I closed the joint savings, leaving her without access. I switched my passwords, canceled the secondary cards she had been using freely. She didn't notice right away. She was too busy playing house with her new man. But the day she went to buy something online and the transaction failed, the storm began. She burst into my room, screaming that I was trying to control her. He stood behind her, egging her on, daring me to be a man and face what I'd done. I sat calmly, laptop open, and reminded her again, this was half mine. She could scream all she wanted, but she couldn't erase the truth. The screaming match escalated until the boyfriend slammed his hand on the doorframe, veins popping in his neck. For a moment, I thought he would lunge, but he didn't. He couldn't, not with her watching. She needed him to look strong, not reckless. So he pulled her away, whispering loud enough for me to hear that I would get what's coming. I let them walk. That night, I made more calls. Lawyers, property assessors, even a locksmith I trusted. Quietly, I mapped the next steps. But fate handed me an unexpected twist before I could act. 3 days later, I came home to flashing lights. Police cars in front of my house. Neighbors gathered again, whispering. My stomach tightened as I parked, bracing for the accusation I knew she had been threatening. But when I stepped out, the sight froze me. It wasn't me they were there for. It was him. 2 officers stood with her boyfriend in handcuffs, pushing him into the back of a squad car. She was on the porch, pale and frantic, insisting there was some mistake. The officers ignored her. One of them glanced at me and muttered that he had outstanding warrants, fraud, unpaid fines, even a suspended license. In that moment, the smirk finally fell from her face. The arrogance drained, replaced with panic. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. As the car pulled away, she turned to me, trembling with rage and fear. She shouted that it was my fault, that I must have set him up. She swore she'd get him out, that I hadn't seen the last of them. But the neighbors saw her screaming. They saw him taken away. And just like that, the story she had spun, me as the cheater, her as the victim, cracked. The power she had built so carefully began to crumble. And I knew then that my revenge wouldn't just be about exposing her lies. It would be about watching her destroy herself piece by piece, with every choice she made. So I waited. Quiet, calm, patient. Because sometimes the harshest revenge isn't fire or fury. It's letting someone dig their own grave while you hold the shovel. The arrest had shaken her facade, but it didn't destroy it. At least, not yet. The morning after he was dragged away, she stormed around the house on the phone, shouting at someone, probably him, or maybe a lawyer she thought could bend the system. Her voice cracked with desperation, but her pride was still intact. She insisted she would get him out, that this wasn't the end. She had forgotten something, though. With him gone, she was exposed. For the first time since this ordeal started, the house was quiet. No leather jacket draped across the couch, no arrogant footsteps in the hallway. Just her, pacing like a trapped animal, and me, sitting at the kitchen table with a calm I hadn't felt in weeks. That day, I set the plan in motion. First, the finances. She had grown used to my income covering everything. The utilities, the groceries, the mortgage. She rarely even checked the accounts. She lived like stability was endless. So when she swiped her card at the grocery store that afternoon and it declined, the storm began. She burst into the house with red cheeks, throwing her purse across the counter, accusing me of cutting her off. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I slid a folder across the table, bank statements, proof of the joint account closures, credit cards with her name removed. My voice stayed flat. Half the house was mine, half the bills were mine, and half the debt she had run up was hers. If she wanted independence, she could pay her share. The shock in her eyes wasn't sadness. It was terror. For the first time, she realized how little she had outside of me. By the weekend, the mask started to crack in public. Her social media posts shifted from gloating selfies with her boyfriend to vague, desperate updates about hard times and people showing their true colors. Friends who had once cheered her on began to drift away. The shine of her new romance dulled now that the man was behind bars and her finances were collapsing. But the real breaking point came when her family got involved. Her mother called me on a Tuesday evening. I braced for the familiar venom, the accusations that I had ruined her daughter's life. Instead, her tone was different, calmer, almost hesitant. She asked if it was true that her daughter's boyfriend had been arrested. I confirmed it. Then she asked if it was true that her daughter had emptied part of her parents' help fund, a savings account they had quietly kept for emergencies, without permission. That part stunned me. I hadn't known, but it explained why her mother's voice shook with controlled anger. Within days, the family arrived at the house. Not to support her, to confront her. I stayed upstairs, listening as they shouted in the living room. Her father's voice thundered, accusing her of lying, of stealing, of disgracing them. She wept, insisting it was all my fault, that I had manipulated everything. But her words rang hollow now. The family had already seen the police take away her lover. They had heard whispers from neighbors. They weren't on her side anymore. When the shouting ended, the front door slammed, and the silence that followed was heavier than anything before. She hadn't just lost her boyfriend. She had lost her parents too. But I wasn't done. That night, I opened my laptop again and dug deeper into her boyfriend's background. The warrants were public record. But what I found next was worse. He wasn't just reckless with money. He had left behind unpaid rent in 3 different apartments. He owed money to small businesses, even to an old employer. And one of those employers had already started sharing his story online. Screenshots, receipts, court filings, evidence piled up like bricks. And because she had flaunted him publicly, because she had plastered their pictures across her feeds, the backlash spread to her too. Friends shared posts exposing his scams, and her name was attached by association. People commented under her old photos, mocking, ridiculing, tearing apart the fairy tale she had tried to sell. The humiliation grew, and she couldn't stop it. The final twist of the knife came one evening when her phone buzzed with a call she didn't expect. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but her shouting carried through the walls. It was a debt collector, not for him, but for her. Credit she had opened quietly, bills she had hidden, all of it now crashing down without my steady income propping her up. The panic in her voice was raw. She tried begging, bargaining, promising payments she couldn't make. When the call ended, she collapsed on the couch, sobbing into her hands. For the first time, I felt something close to pity. But it didn't last. Because pity doesn't erase betrayal. It doesn't undo humiliation. That night, I packed what remained of my belongings. Not the scattered suitcases she had dumped on the porch, but the things she hadn't touched, the important files, heirlooms, personal treasures she had overlooked in her fury. I stacked them neatly in my car, locked the trunk, and left without telling her. But I didn't disappear. 2 days later, she called, voice trembling. The boyfriend had been denied bail. Her parents refused to answer her calls. Her friends had blocked her. She begged me to talk, to help, to remember what we once had. She promised she would fix things, that she would explain everything. I let her speak. Then I hung up. She didn't know it yet, but the story wasn't ending. The worst was still coming. Because karma hadn't finished with her. Not even close. The night I hung up on her, I knew it was the last time she would ever hear my voice without consequences attached. She had played her cards recklessly, betting on lies, humiliation, and a man whose entire history was built on fraud. Now that house of cards had started collapsing, and I wasn't about to hold up the wreckage for her. Days passed, then a week. I stayed in a rented apartment across town, quiet, clean, no drama. The contrast to the chaos I had lived in was almost surreal. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. My phone buzzed constantly with calls from her, then texts, then desperate voicemails. I didn't answer, but the outside world didn't let her desperation stay private. Neighbors who had once smirked at me started reaching out. One of them, the widowed woman across the street, left me a note on my windshield. Everyone saw how she treated you. People are talking. Don't let her drag you back. Another neighbor messaged me privately, telling me she had seen the ex-fiancé screaming at delivery drivers, fighting with bill collectors on the porch. Apparently, she hadn't been paying the utilities. By the second week, the lights in the house flickered out for a full day. Her pride wouldn't let her admit it, but she was drowning. I could have walked away and left it there. But revenge isn't about silence. It's about making the truth undeniable. So I started exposing the pieces she thought she had hidden. I gathered the evidence I had been collecting since the beginning. The staged ambush in the driveway, her false accusations, her public posts smearing my name. I added the financial documents showing her debts, the statements proving I had cut her off legally. And then, I slid it all into a single neat package. Not for the police, not for her. For her parents. I didn't include commentary. Just dates, times, screenshots, bills. Evidence laid out so plainly it didn't need interpretation. The fallout was immediate. Her father showed up at the house one evening. I wasn't there, but a neighbor recorded the scene on their phone. He stood on the porch, shouting that she had disgraced them, that she was no longer welcome under their roof or in their family name. The word spread quickly. Relatives called her, berated her, cut ties. The family she had leaned on to back her lies now abandoned her completely. At the same time, her boyfriend's mess grew worse. Court records circulated online, and because she had tied herself so publicly to him, her name became part of the story. People laughed about her choice, mocked her on community forums, whispered in stores. The same neighbors who had once watched her theatrics in the driveway now avoided her in shame. The humiliation that she had tried to orchestrate for me had become hers. And still, she didn't give up. One evening, my phone buzzed again, not with her number, but with an unknown caller. Against my better judgment, I answered. Her voice came through, shaky, raw, desperate. She begged me to meet her, just once, to talk like adults. She said she wanted to explain, to apologize, to fix what was broken. Curiosity won. I agreed. We met in a cafe on the edge of town. She arrived late, hair unkempt, clothes wrinkled. The arrogance was gone. What sat across from me was a shell of the woman who had once strutted in my driveway with a new man on her arm. Her hands trembled as she held her coffee cup, eyes darting nervously at the people around us, as if everyone knew her shame. She launched into excuses first, stress, confusion, lies she claimed she believed about me. Then she moved to tears, insisting she had been manipulated by her boyfriend, that she hadn't meant for things to go this far. Finally, she shifted to begging. She said she needed help, money, someone to stand by her. I let her finish. I didn't interrupt. When she finally ran out of words, I set my phone on the table and played back one of her old voicemails. The one where she screamed that she had a boyfriend too. The one where she gloated about replacing me. Her face crumpled. I leaned in just enough for her to hear my words over the clatter of the cafe. This is the last time you'll ever sit across from me. You wanted me gone. You got it. But you'll pay for what you did every single day without me here to clean it up. Then I stood, left cash for my coffee, and walked out. She didn't follow. That was the last time I saw her in person. But the consequences kept rolling. Within a month, the house was in foreclosure. She hadn't been able to keep up the mortgage without my income. Debt collectors visited daily. Neighbors reported seeing her crying on the porch, begging them for help. They didn't answer. She had burned too many bridges. Her boyfriend? Still behind bars, case delayed, no chance of release soon. Rumors spread that he had cut ties with her already, blaming her for bringing heat to his life. She was alone. The final humiliation came from the same community that had once laughed at me. A local newsletter, one that thrived on gossip, ran a piece about the dramatic downfall of a young couple. Names weren't printed, but everyone knew. The descriptions of the arrest, the debts, the screaming fights in the driveway were too specific. She became a cautionary tale whispered in markets and coffee shops. As for me, I rebuilt. The rented apartment became a permanent home. My work steadied. My reputation quietly repaired itself once the truth trickled through. The people who had believed her lies early on came back, apologizing, awkwardly trying to mend what they had broken. I accepted some, ignored others. Because the real revenge wasn't about their approval. It was about the image burned into everyone's mind. That night at 6:10 p.m. when she tried to ruin me. And now, the same street that once watched her gloat now watched her collapse. The story had flipped. I never had to raise a hand. I never had to scream. All I did was survive, document, and step aside while karma handled the rest. The last I heard of her was from that widowed neighbor. She told me my ex-fiancé had been spotted working at a low-paying job in a nearby strip mall, hair cut short, face drawn. No car, no boyfriend, no family. Just a ghost of the woman who once tried to bury me in public. I didn't feel pity this time. Just closure. Because revenge doesn't always come with fire and fury. Sometimes, it comes in silence, in patience, in watching someone choke on the very lies they threw at you. And when I drive past that old house now, empty and for sale, I remember the suitcases on the porch, the smirk on her face, the boyfriend's arrogance. And I smile. Because that was the day they lit the match, and all I had to do was let the fire spread. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day, and trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.